We now come to the backbench motion on the Buckland review of autism employment. Sir Robert Buckland to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I move that this House has considered the recommendations of the Buckland review into autism and employment and urges the government, businesses and the wider economy to implement them. And there, in the words of the motion, lies, I think, the force of the review that I had the honour of chairing and the report that was published at the end of February. This was not going to be a bout of navel-gazing, an inward-looking report that purely viewed the challenge that faces autistic people in terms of getting a full or part-time job as purely a matter perhaps viewed traditionally as a problem or a risk or a challenge, but instead as a massive opportunity, not just for all of us who are involved and who have spent years campaigning for and caring about autistic people and indeed the wider neurodiverse family, but also the wider economy, business, whether it's small, medium or large, self-employment, the question of productivity in our economy that has been very much at the heart of the economic debate for more years than I care to remember. The issue about economic inactivity and moving away from this rather tired and I think cliched argument that is viewed through the prism of benefits as opposed to an argument that is viewed about the talent that autistic people have, the range of talents that they have, the myriad of different conditions that it involves, and the potential that they want to realise in a happy and healthy workplace. And can I put on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, my thanks to Stephen Lismore and the team of civil servants at the DWP, some of whom are here today, for their tireless work and support in marshalling the wealth of evidence that we received, both in the form of written evidence and also evidence from a number of round tables that we held during the course of our call for evidence, both in person and online as well, which allowed people from right across the four nations of the UK to take part. And the list of organisations, of businesses and people who have helped make this review such a rich and stimulating process runs to 7 pages in the back of the document. That will tell you, I think, how deep we wanted to go and how meaningful we wanted to make this process. And whilst the review has been robustly independent and in its contents we pull no punches about some of the limitations of existing government programmes, the DWP do deserve my thanks for their dedication and their support. And also, importantly, the support of our leading research charity here in the UK into autism, that is Autistica, to James Cusack and the team there, remembering the leadership of that organisation are themselves autistic people. And that was very important for me on many levels. This had to be a review that was led by autistic people about autistic people. In other words, nothing about us without us. And I speak not only as a parliamentarian, as a former minister, but also as a parent as well of a young woman who will, in due course, be facing choices and hopefully will be in a position to be able to have a job of her own. Now, some people say, well, he's only in it because he cares about his daughter. I'm in it because I care about the hundreds of thousands of people like her who deserve their chance. And they might not be at the top of the tree in terms of their abilities. They might not be able to get those jobs at MI6 and the security services, which, by the way, are really coming to rely upon the gifts that autistic people have. But right through the spectrum, right down to those part-time jobs that will mean so much to the people who can do them, that will give their lives purpose, fulfilment and happiness. And I think that concept of happiness is something that we must not lose in all of this. So there's a moral case to be made for the recommendations that are set out in the review. But there's also, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I make no apology for this, a hard-edged economic case as well. What's good for autistic people will be good for the rest of our society. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for his excellent speech and obviously his brilliant report. Does my honourable friend agree with me that hospitality sector is an excellent sector for people with learning difficulties and autism, etc., to consider? And would he join me on a visit to the Fair Shot Cafe, and I extend the invitation to everyone in the chamber, a social enterprise run by a brilliant young woman, Bianca Trivella, who has set up this organisation to train young people with learning difficulties to become baristas and cafe workers, and has secured jobs for dozens of people now. Would he join me one day in Covent Garden to visit the Fair Shop Cafe?
Well, if there's tea and cake involved, I'm there, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'll be happy to do that. And I think through the point that my honourable friend, the member for the Cities of London Westminster makes, it deals straight away with this stereotype about autism, that somehow the condition means that you can't socialise with people. Nonsense. You know, there are a myriad of different types of presentation. The condition will sometimes present itself in that way, but not always. And there are plenty of autistic people who can and do work in the hospitality sector, an outward-facing job, a communications-based job, which works really well for them. And I think exploding some of these myths is very important, not just from the point of view that in this chamber, but from an employer's point of view. And I think that's really at the heart of the report. It's turning risk into opportunity for employers to get them to think differently. Now, the terms of reference did refer to autism, but I want to reassure people who wanted initially that wider reference to neurodiversity that is not forgotten at all. In fact, a lot of the recommendations have a direct read across to the wide range of neurodiverse conditions, from ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, the whole family of neurodiverse conditions, where there clearly is a communality in terms of the challenges that people face in terms of recruitment and then retention. So let's, in the time that I have, which I know has to be necessarily economic, let's start with some of the facts that we uncovered. Only just under 3 in 10 autistic adults are in full-time or part-time work. It's the lowest of all disability classes. That's about 30%, as opposed to 50% for disability generally. Now, back in late 2012, I led a Backbench Business Committee debate on autism in this chamber. I think it was the first chamber debate on autism that we'd ever had. The position then was that fewer than 1 in 7, namely about 14% of autistic adults, had full-time employment. Now, an improvement it would seem, but we're not comparing like with like. But I think that in the years since, we have seen people in the workforce start to reveal their autism in a way that they wouldn't have before, which is encouraging. But let's not forget that we are still talking about 700,000 or so who have a diagnosis, not the large number, probably hundreds of thousands or even more, of people who perhaps don't have a diagnosis or don't even think of themselves as autistic or neurodiverse in any way. And therefore the figures start to get a little unclear. It does seem to me that progress has been very, very slow. And there's no doubt that as a result of government action and intervention, there has been improvement, but it's still nowhere near the level that we need it to be. I think that the question, therefore, is how do we start moving that dial up, and more on that very shortly. Autistic people have the largest pay gap of all disability groups. They receive a third less on average than non-disabled people. And I'm afraid that is the experience as well of autistic graduates, who experience the worst outcomes of all disability groups. They're the most likely to be overqualified for their job role. They're the most likely to be on 0 hours contracts or part-time. That leads to undermotivation. It leads to less pay, and of course it leads to unhappiness and a lack of fulfilment. 50% of managers express discomfort with the idea of having autistic people in their workforce, and only 35% of autistic employees were fully open about being autistic. And then I will give way,
I'm very grateful for our honourable friend, and I think he's making an excellent case. I was very struck recently to attend a presentation with Worcestershire LEP in which an employer was talking about how his expectations of employing autistic people were completely wrong, and how when he discovered that one of his employees were autistic, his whole organisation learned and benefited as a result. It strengthened the organisation and increased their productivity. Would he agree that many more employers need to engage with that process?
Now, it's stories like that, Madam Deputy Speaker, that can open up a whole new way of thinking to employers, and that's really the beginning of the recommendations that we make in the report. The power of narrative, then linking it together to create a wave of change, lies at the heart of the recommendations. I was going to make a final point about the current situation, which is that about 2/3, that's 61% of disabled people, said that their access to work claim took over 3 months, and 20% said over 6 months. Clearly, whilst access to work is a great principle, that is too slow in order to help change the lives of people who are facing an immediate job offer or have to get to that interview within days sometimes, rather than weeks or months. So what's to be done? Now, first of all, I've talked about turning risk into opportunity, but second of all, it seems to me that a universal by design approach is going to make the most difference here. You know, we've heard a lot over the years about autism-friendly environments and going out of our way to reach out and understand and allow people to explain. But that, I think, will only have a limited impact, and an impact upon those people who are comfortable and prepared to talk about their autism. Surely it would be better to have a universal change to the way in which we recruit and retain employees, not just to embrace those with a diagnosis, but those who either do not want to disclose or those who don't have a diagnosis in the first place. So suddenly, the numbers aren't just 700,000, they're probably going well over 1 million, and I think that might itself be a conservative estimate. So what about the recommendations then? Well, there are several groups to our 19 recommendations, and I think they can be summarised in this way, if I may. The first group, the first 3, relate to initiatives to raise awareness, reduce stigma, and capitalise on productivity. And we're already working with people and autism organisations and employer-facing organisations to start that national campaign with the good news stories like the one from my honourable friend from Worcester. You know, in certain jobs, autistic staff can be way more productive than neurotypical staff, with some statistics showing productivity improvements ranging from 45% to 145%. And then, and I'm grateful to Autistica for their work, to promote their new Neurodiversity Employers Index, which will allow employers to measure themselves against best practice with an annual awards programme, the sort of approach we've seen in other walks of life that have really made a difference. And I think the index, with the support and approval of my honourable friend the Minister of State and the DWP, really would give employers that degree of certainty, that uniform framework within which we can see the dial start to move up. And then developing those small pilots of good practices, which again will be the show and tell method of ensuring that we can, through some of the larger national and multinational organisations and representative bodies, start to spread this out. The second bucket of recommendations, 4 to 8, relates to the support needed for autistic people to begin or return to a career. And again, this is all about trying to, first of all, make sure that new programmes such as the Universal Support Programme are designed in a way that meets the varying need of autistic people, with supported employment programmes available, and then supported internships, which the evidence shows are a wonderful route for autistic young people to develop the skills that they need. I'm glad that the DFE is piloting an entry route for supported internships for disabled people without an education, health and care plan. And I do think that, again, that embraces this universal by design approach. And I'll give away very briefly.
Just as Chairman of the Education Committee, I completely agree with him on the supported internships and their value. Does he agree, though, more broadly, we need to look at this issue of people without an EHCP? We know that many autistic people don't require or haven't had an EHCP, and we should be looking, whether it's supported internships or extra support for apprenticeships, to make them as accessible as possible for people to progress into work and training.
He's absolutely right about that. He might have noted the very interesting findings of the Nuffield Trust a few weeks ago that make the point that whilst we have to have a system of diagnosis and the EHCP system, which I was proud to support as a backbencher when we brought in the Children and Families Act, that is a very narrow funnel. And that takes a long time to get children and young people into. Instead of just concentrating on the funnel, we need a more universal approach that can then embrace many, many people who will not get an EHCP, but who have particular needs. And that's why I think promoting cross-industry autism support groups and opportunities for work shadowing and volunteering have to all be part of this. And of course, as he says, apprenticeships in recommendation 7 is a key part. And then finally in that group, working with autism charities and other groups to ensure that more people know about access to work and improvements to the speed of the access to work programme. Now, if the adjustment passport and the access to work plus pilots that are being run by DWP, and I address this to the Minister, produce positive results, let's roll them out as nationally as soon as possible. Can I then move on to the next group of recommendations, 9 to 13, very briefly? And that is all about changing recruitment practices so that they appropriately support autistic applicants. And we need to start with careers advisors in schools and colleges and the National Careers Service in England and their equivalents in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, so that there is a better understanding of autism, that autistic customers can be better supported and advice can be given that is more properly tailored. And then when it comes to disability confident, we need to increase the rigour of that work to develop higher levels. We need more assessments under disability confident, and we need to build in a link to the new Neurodiversity Employers Index so that disability confident organisations themselves will be, in the eyes of autistic job seekers, much better placed to help them. And then the Employee Health and Disability Service, how online support with that service can link employers to appropriate and accessible advice on best practice when it comes to recruitment. And I think the representative bodies have a role here. The Recruitment and Employment Confederation, it seems to me, has a key role to play, because not only can they advise individual businesses, but also recruitment consulting agencies. There's a myriad of agencies that are up and down our high streets that do the heavy lifting of recruitment for SMEs. And I think we have to get into those agencies. It'll be good for them because it means they'll have more successful results in placing employees, autistic employees, and it'll be good, of course, for wider business. Because let's face it, Madam Deputy Speaker, these SMEs were not going to have big human resources departments. They were not going to be able to do that. And that's why I think really getting into the agencies is going to be important. And then let's not forget the self-employed. Let's make sure that we identify sources of information and support for people who want to get on with things on their own and set up their own business. In the few minutes I have left, just 2 more groups, very, very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to finish this important report. Supporting autistic people already in the workforce is covered in recommendations 14 to 17, and again, working with the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development to make sure that the 2018 Neurodiversity at Work Guidance is published and accessible seems to me to be at the heart of that. And then finally, with career progression, We need to promote the value of employees, resource groups and support networks within larger organisations, and then working with autism charities and the representative bodies, really develop those training packages to allow autistic staff to progress. Now, a new task group will be set up in the weeks ahead, and I say weeks ahead, but I'm working with colleagues in the DWP to identify an independent chair and suitably qualified members, because we need to monitor progress. We need to hold government to account. We need to audit the progress that we're making, and I want to see by certainly the end of this decade that number of 1 in 3 at least up to the disability average, and who knows beyond that. Let's be ambitious here, and I call upon my honourable friend to respond positively with all the power that she can muster on behalf of herself and her government colleagues to the report and its recommendations, which I think aren't the end. They're not even the beginning of the end, but they are the end of the beginning. Let's make progress.
Yeah.
Well done.
Question is, as on the order paper, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to follow the Right Honourable and Learned Member for South Swindon, to congratulate him on securing this debate and on the report, which I think has made a very valuable contribution on this extremely important topic. I think the report does a very good job in laying bare the obstacles facing autistic people in the workplace, obstacles that we need, as he's rightly said, to overcome. And I applaud the obvious passion that the Right Honourable Member has shown in presenting the report to us. I didn't know about his own family link, and I'm grateful to him for explaining that to us as well. The Select Committee, Madam Deputy Speaker, has recently launched our own inquiry into disability employment. That's going to follow up the report we published in 2021 on the disability employment gap. We've just closed our call for evidence for that inquiry. I'm glad we've received evidence from Autistica, amongst others. And we're soon going to be starting to take oral evidence from disability charities and others. And the review, I think, will help us frame particular questions on autism employment in the context of that inquiry. As the review points out, the employment gap is much worse for autistic people than it is for disabled people more broadly. A disappointing feature of the report for me, though, is the rather unambitious nature of the recommendations. They're along the lines of the government ought to try a bit harder on this and do a bit more of that. There aren't any targets set out in the report, nothing to really help us to monitor progress. So I fear when the question is asked in 2 or 5 years' time, have these recommendations been delivered, then the answer is going to be a bit unclear. I don't blame the Right Honourable and Learned gentleman for that. No doubt ministers would not have gone along with a higher level of ambition, but I fear the government will be able to accept all of these recommendations and not really change anything. That does seem to me a bit of a missed opportunity. The report highlights rightly the huge size of the autism employment gap. How much should we aim to reduce it by? Now, in his speech a moment ago, the Right Honourable Member suggested that the aim should be to increase the rate of employment amongst people with autism at least up to the overall disability employment rate. Now, I think if that target had been in the report, that would have been a really substantial target to measure progress against, but it isn't in there as it stands. And my fear is that a kind of lack of ambition has regrettably marked the government's efforts on disability employment for some time. There was a moment not long ago when a higher level of ambition was announced. And members opposite may well remember that they campaigned in the 2015 general election campaign on a target announced by David Cameron to halve the wider disability employment gap. That disability employment gap fell sharply from 1998 to 2010 through the New Deal for disabled people, but it's been kind of stuck at around 30 percentage points ever since. It came down for a bit after 2015. I think, not surprisingly, perhaps in the pandemic it went back up. Unfortunately, however, that target of halving the gap was abandoned shortly after the 2015 election had been safely won. And that does strike me as the kind of move that gives politicians, unfortunately, a bad name. But our 2021 Select Committee report called unanimously on a cross-party basis for that target to be reinstated. So I do want this afternoon to make a call that in responding to this report, which does refer in paragraph 2.7 to making progress on closing the employment gap, the government should set an ambitious target for increasing the rate of employment among people with autism, perhaps, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has just suggested, up to at least the overall disability employment rate. Because the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, as he spells out with passion in his foreword, that we are at the moment missing out on the skills and energy that autistic people could be contributing to the detriment of us all. He's absolutely right. And the danger, I fear, is that without targets against which to measure progress, the report may not really change things. Yeah.
Really grateful to him for engaging so closely. Can I give him some reassurance? I absolutely agree with him that without a means of accountability, then the work that we've done, I fear, will be lost. The task group, I think, will have a very important role and will have the freedom, I think, to start really developing some more hard and fast approaches where necessary and to hold government's feet to the fire of whatever complexion. I hope that gives him some reassurance.
Well, I'm grateful to him for that, and perhaps he could use his influence with the task group. I don't know whether he may be a member of the task group. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but I'm sure he'll have influence with it. Perhaps he could urge them to adopt that target which he set out a few minutes ago, which I think really potentially could make a really substantial difference. I welcome the call in the report for, I quote, processes and support mechanisms that enable autistic staff to be recruited and to succeed. And in that context, I want to draw attention to a concept which isn't mentioned in the report. I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't, but one that has been referred to, and not least in our Select Committee report, and that's the concept of job carving, which means assessing a person's skills and then tailoring an employee role to those skills. So Catherine Hale, Director of the Chronic Illness Inclusion Project, told our 2021 inquiry that is particularly effective in supporting people with learning disabilities, and given the big overlap between autism and learning disability, I think job carving could certainly help. Mind, the charity, says that job carving roles for people with learning disabilities can benefit employers by removing tasks from other employees and freeing up time. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, in its report Working Better, described job carving as a flexible way of managing a workforce that could allow employers to utilise their staff skills in the most productive way, whilst enabling disabled people to make a valuable contribution to the world of work. So our report called on the government, as part of its then forthcoming National Disability Strategy, to provide detailed guidance to employers and providers of employment support on how they could job carve roles for disabled people, and on Job Centre Plus to encourage local employers in their area to job carve. The government's response to our report didn't pick up the concept of job carving, but ministers could still pick this up in responding to the report we're debating this afternoon. I wonder whether the minister, who I know takes a very close interest in this area, does recognise that job carving could make a really significant difference to the employment prospects of many autistic people. One thing the government response to our 2021 inquiry did refer to was the plan at that time to increase the number of places on the Intensive Personalised Employment Support Scheme, IPES, which is a programme providing voluntary employment support to people with disabilities and complex barriers to employment. As we noted in our report, the guidance to IPES providers does explicitly mention job carving as an intervention that can help disabled people find and stay in work. And IPES is referred to in paragraph 211 of the Right Honourable Gentleman's report. And his report points out, rightly, as we heard in our evidence session last week, in a one-off session on the government's Back to Work plan, but it is pointed out in the Right Honourable Gentleman's review, referrals to IPES have now ended. There are not going to be any more of them. The Work and Health Programme, also referred to in paragraph 211 of the report, is also coming to an end, we were told by the providers at our evidence session last week. So those are two programmes rightly identified in the report as providing very valuable help to people with autism to move into employment, are being shut down. And it doesn't appear, as far as I can tell, and the Minister may well want to comment on this in due course, but it doesn't appear that any of the newer employment support programmes, like Work Well and Universal Support, which are being brought forward, it doesn't look to me as though any of them will provide support comparable to that which is at the moment being closed down, and which the report has rightly identified as very helpful. So the fear is that despite the very laudable aims set out in the report, which I know that the Minister is going to endorse, in reality we're going backwards. That provision that is there at the moment and has been there for some time is being removed. So it would be very helpful, I think, if the Minister could tell us why are IPES and the Work and Health Programme being closed? Where are the new initiatives to close what looks like an emerging gap in provision for people with autism? Employers are struggling at the moment to fill vacancies, and the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right that there is a very big opportunity here to boost disability employment if we can just find a way to enable employers to tap into this opportunity. I think the Honourable Member for Worcester is absolutely right that employers are very willing to do so if only they knew how. And it's a bit of a closed book to them. There's no lack of willingness, I don't think, on the part of employers, but there is a lack of information. Very interesting, I thought, to read in the Right Honourable Member's review about Auticon, which I hadn't heard of before, an IT consultancy in which 80% of the workforce is autistic, highly talented IT consultants. The founders, I think they were in Scandinavia, recognised that many autistic adults have extraordinary abilities, pattern recognition, sustained concentration, attention to detail, qualities which are very valuable in many employment contexts. But autistic people need support to secure and maintain those jobs. And Auticon, it specifically provides that, understanding the needs of its employees, it provides that support, and they built a successful business on the base of it. Yes, I'll gladly give way.
I'm very grateful to him giving way on that point, and I'm glad also that the report highlights the good work of GCHQ in this respect, which is a big employer in my neck of the woods. But I also just wanted to give him another example along those lines. There's a company in Worcester called Titania Security Systems, a cyber security company, where the chief executive is an autistic woman, and they have tailored their recruitment process specifically to address some of the challenges identified in my Right Honourable Friend's report, so that they can recruit more autistic employees because they find them such valuable and productive employees.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member, because that sounds to me a wonderful model, and the more of that kind of initiative that we see around the country, the better. The report makes the point, I think, that a line manager in a mainstream business may well not know that somebody they are managing is autistic. Whether the employer can agree reasonable adjustments, as is their right under the Equality Act, will depend on them self-disclosing their diagnosis to their line manager. And as the review notes, whatever the level of understanding amongst company directors or senior staff, if the line manager is unable or unwilling to provide support, then the employee will struggle to stay in their job. The review is right to point out that there isn't at the moment any easily accessible guidance for employers and line managers on how to support autistic staff. Evidence so far to our inquiry suggests that employers as the Honourable Member for Worcester has rightly said, want to do the right thing, but very often simply don't know how. And when they try it, and when they are pointed in the right direction, it turns out to be a very positive experience. What can the government do to give employers confidence in this area? The review calls on the department to continue to develop disability confident. I'm quoting from the continue to develop disability confident, increasing the rigour of developmental work needed to achieve the higher disability confident levels. I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that's a very kind way of expressing the point. The noble Lord Shinquin, who sits on the government benches in the other place and chaired the Disability Commission for the chair for the Centre for Social Justice, he spoke for many of our witnesses when he said disability confident, quote, is not making a measurable impact at the moment. Employers can, as things stand, achieve the highest level of disability confident accreditation without employing a single disabled person. In responding to the predecessor Select Committee, the department said 6 years ago it was developing proposals for an evaluation of disability confident. That commitment, first expressed 6 years ago, was announced again in response to our report almost 3 years ago, in November 2021. But I must say I still haven't seen any sign of anything happening. Perhaps the Minister can update us. Is that evaluation of disability confident now complete? And when can we expect disability confident finally to be reformed? The review is absolutely right as well to highlight the importance of access to work and to call for improvements there. And it makes the point, and I think the Right Honourable Member referred to this in his speech, that almost 2/3 of disabled people stated that it took over 3 months for their application to be processed, 20% saying it took over 6 months. He's absolutely right, that is far too slow. And I agree that, as the review suggests, if the adjustment passport produces positive results, it should be rolled out nationally as soon as possible. But 3 years ago, we were promised, in response to our report in November 2021, that the adjustment passport would be piloted from November 2021, and then, if successful, expanded to support all access to work customers. So we seem to be, as far as I can tell, no further forward today in 2024 than we were in November 2021. When are these long-promised improvements actually going to materialise? One other policy lever the government could pull is mandatory disability workforce reporting, recommended unanimously on a cross-party basis in our 2021 report. There is a voluntary framework through which employers can choose to report, but in late 2021 the government launched a consultation on whether to require large employers to report the number of disabled people they were employing. That work was then paused. I understand it has now resumed, and that the government plans to publish its findings and next steps in the course of this year. I wonder if the Minister can update us on when we can expect to see that work, and does she agree that requiring employers to report on the number of disabled people they employ, and within that perhaps the number of autistic people, could be very effective in encouraging the employment of people with autism and other health impairments. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome this report and the opportunity to debate it today, and the way that it's highlighted very important issues. And I also welcome the approach, the very positive approach, the Right Honourable Gentleman took in introducing the report earlier on, seeing the scale of the opportunity that we have here if we can get this right. But laudable aspirations in this area, with delivery delayed for years, are just not enough. We need, I think, an ambitious target to increase the rate of employment amongst people with autism and amongst other disabled people as well. And we need worked up plans and timescales to deliver them. And I do very much hope, perhaps as a result of the work of the task group that the Right Honourable Member has mentioned, that we will finally see some of that when the government responds formally to this very welcome report.
SNP spokesperson Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm running through my mind the words follow that. And I want to thank the Honourable Member, the Right Honourable Member, I beg your pardon, for South Swindon, who has produced an outstanding report. And his lived experience, and the lived experience of his family, has absolutely made the report a much better thing. And I thank him for all the work he's done on this. And to follow the Right Honourable Member for East Ham is always a privilege and a pleasure. And I think he's taken away some of my best lines, but I will actually carry on regardless. Yes, okay. It's a real pleasure to speak in this debate today, and I signed up for it immediately, having spoken many times on the subject of autism in this place. And I think it would be remiss if we didn't mention Dame Cheryl Gillan right at the start of this debate, because this was one of the first debates I spoke in, was on the closure of the autistic one-stop shop in Motherwell back in 2015. And she was so kind and so helpful to me when I tried to, speak on this important topic. I should also point out that I'm very close to someone with 3 autistic sons. My own youngest son has never been diagnosed, but I don't think there's, much doubt that he is somewhere on the spectrum, and I think he would admit that himself. So, I also would like to thank Ambitious About Autism and the National Autistic Society for their briefings. They're always helpful, they're always good. But the current situation regarding employment for those with autism across the UK is simply not good enough. The UK government have consistently banged on about reducing economic inactivity and encouraging people into work, but the rhetoric is still not matched with proper support, especially as we're talking today about those who are neurodiverse. Issues with access to work, as we've already heard, and the provision of workplace adjustments mean that many autistic people are slipping through gaps. This is certainly the case for those with autism. We've already heard that only 3 in 10 of working age autistic people in the UK are in employment, compared to 5 in 10 for all disabled people and 8 in 10 for non-disabled people. Ambitious About Autism's employment surveys found that 71% of those unemployed would like to be in work, but less than a third were confident they would find work within the next year. This signifies a huge gap in the support currently employed. I've seen firsthand the transformative power of employment when autistic and disabled people are properly supported into work. I had the privilege of visiting University Hospital Wishaw to meet some of the participants in the supported internship scheme run by DFN Project Search. And I met some of the students on the scheme, and some of them have now found employment, some of them have now married, and the transformation in their lives and in the lives of their families cannot be underestimated. I literally had to be dragged off the scene because the visit was one of the most uplifting ones I've undertaken as part of my role as an MP. Employment brings fulfilment, independence and purpose, and can, as I've said, positively transform the life of the employee if well supported. However, even when employed autistic people face challenges and discrimination, as the Buckland report finds, autistic workers face the largest pay gap of all disability groups, earning an average a third less than their non-neurodiverse counterparts. Further, the report notes that the autistic graduates are twice as likely to be unemployed after 15 months as non-disabled graduates, and only 36% find work in this period. And the autistic graduates are more likely to be overqualified for the job they have, and they're most likely to be in 0 hours contracts, and the least likely to be in a permanent role. All of this requires looking at properly. It's actually an appalling level of statistics. Morally, we should be ensuring that autistic workers are supported when they trying to find employment, but it's also incumbent on government, employers and other stakeholders to ensure that those with autism are adequately supported when they're in work. The SNP welcome the publication of the Buckland Review into Autism and Employment and urge the government to implement the recommendations to ensure that autistic people have the opportunities they deserve. I further welcome the report's engagement with autistic organisations, as lived experience is vitally important when shaping policy, and this is something that the UK government doesn't always have a good track record on. A lack of access to good quality careers advice, inflexible hiring practices and non-inclusive workplace cultures are just some of the barriers facing autistic people. Once employment has been achieved, autistic people can struggle when employers don't or can't put in place proper adjustments to support them. Autistic people process information differently and experience a built environment in a totally different manner, which can impinge on their ability to carry out their work. Too much bright light, noise or social interaction can be overwhelming. And additionally, as has been said, autistic people might need more time to process interview questions. It's imperative that employers are aware of such differences and take steps to accommodate autistic workers or any disabled workers for that matter. A person close to me has an autistic son who wears a badge at work to indicate his mood to his co-workers. Simple thing. If he's feeling overwhelmed, he doesn't want people to talk to him, he doesn't want to be interrupted, he turns the badge to that particular thing. Actually, from my own experience in further education, I know that my students benefited immensely when we had autistic students in class. At first they thought it was strange, at first they were a bit wary, but actually over the year they developed an understanding of autism and a real respect for the autistic student that they sat next to. And the same happens in workplaces. If we can get people into the right place, the right job, everyone benefits. Everyone benefits. And if we don't accommodate autistic workers, it's wasting so much talent and skill. And it actually makes no sense for businesses either, because we've already heard the special skills that autistic people can bring to the workplace. When businesses properly accommodate neurodiverse employees, the results can be amazing. I've been to visit the Barclay Banks campus in Glasgow, which was designed by a woman architect who has autistic sons. And the difference in that building is awesome. So it's built with that in mind. Big open plan offices with chill pods and a real understanding of what's happening. Barclays have great employees as a result, and people are getting good work, proper jobs. It's imperative that this UK government acts urgently to improve support for all disabled people, including those with autism, and actually to tackle barriers to employment. It's really, really worrying that the Prime Minister's most recent announcement on footnote reform, pushing people into work that doesn't actually take into account what they are suffering and what they need, is actually appalling. Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, I get very passionate about this, so I will try to rush through. It's really important access to work is reformed as is called for, and can I also say reforms to sick pay when people have to take time off need to be done as well. Could I also say that in Scotland, we try our best. The SNP government is trying to be a fair network nation, and we are investing money in autism. And actually, simple things like also working with within education to get ITA to teach trainee teachers about autism. We need to get work, because education is the gateway to employment, as we know. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will stop there. I want to again congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Swindon. I want the Minister to take on board all of the recommendations and to actually make life much easier for those with autism in the workplace.
Shadow Minister Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to be the next in line to congratulate the Right Honourable and Learned Member for South Swindon on securing this debate and opening proceedings, but particularly also on the contents of his report. I think his persistence in pushing to raise awareness of the barriers autistic people face in employment is greatly to his credit and benefits this House and our understanding of these issues too. I'd also like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting the debate and colleagues for making such valuable and insightful contributions. In passing, I'd also like to put on the record my admiration for Autism Together, which is formerly the Wirral Society for Autistic Children, a very great local charity that's been around for 50 years and does very good work indeed in this area, an area which it's not always been fashionable for people to concentrate on. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Buckland review, as we've heard this afternoon, has been broadly welcomed by charities and other organisations across the spectrum. It shone a light on the barriers that neurodivergent people continue to face when trying to get into, stay in and get on in the workplace. I think it's also demonstrated that there is an increasing understanding of the benefits of ensuring that people with neurodivergence can actually get to work, because they have a unique view often and unique talents which not only GCHQ know about, but there are many other sectors that could benefit if only they were to realise it. The review's filled with statistics which make for really grim reading, to say the least, which is only 30% of autistic adults are currently in work. What a waste. Where they are in work, autistic people face the largest pay gap of all disability groups. That is simply not a fair reflection of the benefit they bring to employment, and autistic graduates are the most likely to be overqualified for the position they do have and least likely to be in a permanent role. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, our society suffers as a result, and our economy suffers as a result of the waste that the Buckland review before us has put before this House, and it's something that we ought to be very, very anxious to do something about. The review highlights a startling 50% of managers feel uncomfortable with the idea of hiring disabled people. Just imagine wanting to work but being prevented from doing so because the hiring manager feels uncomfortable around you or doesn't understand the way in which you relate to the world and has preconceived ideas about your abilities. I mean, this is pure discrimination. It's not always deliberate, but it must feel pretty similar, whether you suffer it because of ignorance and benign ignorance or bigotry. And we have to think about how we can get rid of the ignorance, which this report talks about, but also give people who are neurodivergent the confidence that the law will support them if they are subjected to this bigotry. Now, the Honourable Gentleman has talked very much about the soft power end in his report of how this can be tackled. But I would say that we also have to think as a society about the harder ends of this. We have discrimination law in place for people with disabilities, and sometimes perhaps we need to think about how to give that more bite. Now, I admit that the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman hasn't done that in his review, and it probably wasn't in the terms of reference, but I think that it's important when we're considering this issue that we remember that context, because we simply can't let generation after generation of very talented people be wasted in this way. So I think the review's key recommendations are only a first step on the road to eliminating some of these barriers, and the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman knows this, although he's appropriately passionate about what he's discovered in his review. And undoubtedly many of the recommendations have the potential to have a positive impact on autistic people's experiences and open up those vistas of opportunity for them and our society that it's important that we try to give them. The review rightly has a strong focus on collaborating with autistic people, employers, employer organisations and specialist support groups, and that is important because there are unique insights to be had there, and clearly his report has done that very well. For example, my front bench colleague, the Honourable Member for Lewisham Deptford and the Shadow Minister for Disabled People went to an event attended by BT a few months ago to highlight how to improve their hiring practices and workplace support for neurodivergent people. And she tells me that BT spoke highly not only of the positive benefits felt by autistic employees, but also of how the company itself has been able to capitalise on the unique skills that they bring with them. There are many examples of this, some of which we've heard today. So the review's been largely welcomed, but we must now ask how quickly it can be implemented and whether we can give it a bit more bite, I have to say, because the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman is very gentle in his way, and no doubt he's been put in particular railroads by the government in producing his report. But what steps will the Minister, when she answers this debate, take to ensure that other neurodivergent and disabled people benefit from measures similar to those outlined in the review? And what can she say in backing up the remarks that my Right Honourable friend, the member for East Ham and chair of the Select Committee, made in his contribution, especially about increasing the predictability and speed of access to work, making it more predictable and quicker, making it easier for people in a practical way to know that they are going to be supported if they make this step into work. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the last few years the government has brought a hodgepodge, a patchwork of piecemeal measures claiming to strengthen and improve the rights of disabled and neurodivergent people. There's been lots and lots of activity, but very little effective output in terms of how the number of people with disabilities in work has actually changed. We've had the National Disability Strategy, which was largely viewed as tinkering around the edges. We then had the Health and Disability White Paper, which raised more questions than it answered. We had the Disability Action Plan, again, a smattering of well-received, quite small policy ideas. And then, as my Right Honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, the member for East Ham, pointed out, we had the dropping of the target for increasing employment of disabled people more generally. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had consultation after consultation, pilots, we've had various hearts and minds initiatives with employers, but little has changed, as we've seen from the information that was in the in the Buckland review. So we need proper action, not more gentle observations. And we need to deal with the societal barriers that make people with neurodiversity in their lives challenging and their employment prospects far too narrow than they should be at the moment. So inclusion measures, I think that there was a contradiction which struck me in listening to the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman and his very admirable review between the bleak picture that the review paints of the continuing barriers autistic people face trying to get into work, and some of the other attitudes which can be discerned in the government about how we deal with this. So, for example, the Minister for Women and Equalities is on the record saying that equality, diversity and inclusion measures have already gone too far, dismissing them as snake oil and performative, and deriding disability, equality, inclusion measures in the economy as woke, something to be eliminated, driven out. And this sends, I think, confusing and mixed messages about what the government's approach is. And I'm hoping I'm going to hear from the Minister in her response, an approach which is far more positive than that, which can tell us that the government intends to do something about this review, but also take up some of the issues that my right honourable friend, the member for East Ham, raised in his contribution about targets. Rather than nice words and warmth, which we're all used to, we all agree with, we want targets, we want some commitment to practical action, not just a repeat of the issues about disability confident employers, when we know, as again my right honourable friend said in his remarks, that analysis shows that disabled people don't report better experiences working for disability confident employers compared to employers that aren't part of the scheme, and that you can actually say that you're a disability confident employer without employing a single disabled person. Isn't it now time for targets? Isn't it now time for transparency about the numbers of people with disabilities who are in work? Isn't it time for reporting, more rigour, and if needs be, an application of the law?
Yeah. Minister Mims.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable and learned friend for raising this important debate today on autism employment. And in fact, it's a pleasure to follow the Lesbian Visibility Week debate as well. I had the pleasure of hearing Dame Kelly Holmes talking about how it changed her life at an Inspiring Leadership Awards event this week with the foundation there. And we have a covenant which covers this around disadvantaged girls and vulnerable young women. So it's a chance to put that on the record. And I'd also like to pay tribute, and I thank the Honourable Lady opposite from the SNP for raising Dame Cheryl Gillan, her passion and commitment and championing to autism and the opportunities and the understanding of the individual. It is so important, and my honourable friend, right honourable friend, does this so well. And I very firmly believe that autism should not be a barrier to starting, staying or succeeding in employment, and I know that all of you and those watching share this vision. Although not every autistic person can work, given the right support and long-term right support, not just only to get into work, but to progress in work, the vast majority could. 1 in 70 people are autistic, so that's about 1 million people across the UK. And giving more autistic people the chance to get into work is incredibly good for them. As we heard from my right honourable friend today, a huge opportunity to tackle economic inactivity. The talent range and myriad of potential must be realised, and I'll do my utmost today to give an update on many of the questions raised and what next, because we know it's good for employers, as we heard, in building that diverse workforce, to work with more diverse customers. And absolutely in my role it is about, and answering the Honourable Lady opposite, it's about proper inclusion and action, turning warm words, not just from myself, but from employers and from sectors, into action. And I can promise the Honourable Lady there's been no railroading as to what the right honourable member should include in his review. And I'll come on to the next steps as a result. And there will be a further update on the Disability Action Plan in July also. So I think hopefully we're starting off well on this in terms of answering questions. Now, in 2017, the government did set a goal to see 1 million more disabled people in employment by 2027. I am proud to say that in the first quarter of 2022, the number of disabled people in employment had increased by 1.3 million, meaning the goal had been met by only within 5 years. And the first quarter of 2023, disability employment had risen to 1.6 million in total since the goal has been announced. But I'm very aware that the progress has been good, but it has not been even. And to the chair of the Select Committee opposite, I feel I'm under scrutiny again from him this week. I'm very much focused on this next goal and how we review and shape what's next, and please do watch this space. It is sad and true that we've heard today that currently only 3 in 10 working age autistic people are in employment, even though we know the majority of autistic people would like to be in work, and indeed their families would love to see them progressing. And this is a dial that my right honourable and learned friend says needs moving on autism and, as we've heard, on wider neurodiversity. And we need to change the dial on that. And so the design that we're working on for universal support and engagement with DFE, whether it is supported internships or indeed broad apprenticeships, it has to work for the young people and the people that we have in our communities. Because 7 in 10 working age autistic people unable to access independence, that sense of fulfilment that employment can bring, is far too many. And indeed.
For giving way. As she heard, her right honourable and learned friend did suggest a few minutes ago that there should be a target for raising the level of employment amongst autistic people, at least up to the wider disability employment rate. I wonder if that's a target she would consider adopting.
I'm absolutely looking at the right way forward, because for me, in terms of disability employment, if you acquire a disability, how you're retained in work, as well as if you have a particular impairment or need, we need to be looking at. So I'm looking at in the round. And as part of the disability confidence challenges too, the new guidance for leadership, working with the CIPD, is really important. We need to be talent confident. Many employers want to employ more inclusively. They just struggle on how to do it and regress back to the same old recruitment. Yes.
Thank the Minister for giving way. But there's also an award, an Autism Friendly Employer Award. Now, I think we should be looking at that as well. I'm proud to say I've got that, one of the few parliamentarians to do so. But it is worth raising that as well.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that point. I think that's really important for all of us. In fact, my honourable friend from the cities of London and Westminster mentioned the Fair Shot campaign in Covent Garden. I think we're all popping down for a coffee and a banana cake. But my predecessor really enjoyed his visit, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that, because this is incredibly important for people. The honourable gentleman opposite also talked about job carving. I call it job design. Again, it's about working with employers, about the roles that they've got, interviewing them in the way that suits, giving them the long-term support, and indeed the chair of the Select Committee rightly totally agree with all of the charities that say JCPs always having that individualised approach. And I promise the honourable lady opposite and all those watching, it's about the right role for the right person in front of us at DWP, so that we can actively change people's lives. It's what we're in the business of doing, not just those warm words. And to the point around self-employment that my right honourable and learned friend mentioned as well, this is where the link into the Lilac Review, this being an active, positive choice for disabled people, because actually we recognise talent and ability and entrepreneurship, a positive choice there. Access to cash is very important. Let me turn to my right honourable and learned friend's point around autistic people and the recruitment process. And I can assure the House that, and thank Helen Tomlinson, the government's menopause champion, who's also the head of talent at the Adecco Group. Thanks to Helen's support, my officials are now working with Adecco with the recruitment and employment Confederation to develop new methods for recruitment that work effectively for both autistic and neurotypical applicants, ensuring that employers are more able to secure talent that they need to thrive. And the government is determined to provide the right support and note and agree also the point about career progression for autistic people. Access to work continues to provide grants for extra costs, and those adjustment passports, they are very key, and we're focusing on new employment. And I recognise that there have been delays, and that's partly because more people know and understand the value of access to work. And we are continuing to develop universal support scheme. I recognise the point the honourable gentleman has made, and I hope I'm reassuring him with the design on that. And there are some matters that I am happy, because I can't cover all of the wide-ranging points in this debate, that I'm happy to write to him. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like this afternoon, though, in terms of the challenge around being ambitious and what next, and in terms of what we're looking to achieve, announced that my officials will be very shortly going out to the autism community to seek expressions of interest in joining the group, and starting with the role of the chair. This will be a transparent, inclusive process, and the selection panel will be entirely independent of government, and I fully expect that's where outcomes and what next will be realised when it comes to the ambition of this review. So, to conclude, this report is a big and extremely welcome step forward. It's not only produced a plan to overcome barriers for autistic people, but shows a path that can be followed for other groups facing barriers to employment, and for those other types of neurodiversity and learning. So I thank my right honourable and learned friend once again. I'm out of time, but I will very briefly.
Grateful, just before she concludes, the review did make the point about the reform of disability confidence. Can she give us an update on that? Has the evaluation now completed? When will the changes be brought forward?
Yes, I thank the honourable gentleman. There has been some changes. I mentioned some of the updates, and there is more to come, which I think the honourable gentleman will be interested and will be welcoming. So if he can just bear with me. If I'm not constantly in the chamber being examined, I can get on with the bits that I want to bring forward to the House, if that actually makes sense to those watching. And what I would say is I think we are seeing some great progress and some best practice, and that's why I think things always work best in terms of real change and getting autistic people into employment. I agree with the honourable lady opposite. I agree with the whole reason for the report, and thank James and the charity and all of those that brought it together. We need to deliver for autistic people. This is just the start, and may that long continue to be the ambition we deliver on.
So Robert Buckland to wind up.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll exercise my prerogative because I think there was a proper debate. We had some challenge to the report and the approach taken. Can I first of all say I make no apology that this report did not, as is so often the case, make yet another call for a change in the law or ask for another slug of government money, because I just don't think either will really cut it. I take the point of the honourable lady from Wallasey to talk about the legal framework. We have equalities legislation. We have protected characteristic, namely disability, which clearly autism comes fairly and squarely in. And I'm absolutely with her in terms of making sure that employers and employees are much better equipped to understand the full ambit of that and what discrimination actually means. Because she's right to say discrimination isn't, and very often, more often than not, it is not the product of deliberate or malicious or willful behaviour. It's the product of ignorance. And that word ignorance, I think, underpins so much of the obstacles that autistic people and neurodiverse people face in the workforce. Now, I'm with her on waging a war on ignorance. So can I just say to my honourable members opposite, don't confuse perhaps a diplomatic or gentle approach with an inner determination and steel to get change. That's always been the way I've operated. I do believe in respect and courtesy, but underpinning that is a determination to hold the minister to account and to hold governments of a future complexion to account, which is why the task group I think, has a very important role. And I'm grateful to those who work, and civil servants who work with the Minister, for sharing with me the draft terms of reference. I think that today's debate can help inform that process further. I think the terms of reference are a good start. They emphasise the independence of the chair and the group. I think that we should make it absolutely clear within those terms of reference that the group is free to look at targets and to look at timescales and to look at the sort of approach that I've presaged in my speech, and that the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for East Ham, the chair of the Select Committee, rightly presses us on. So let's take that away from this debate as something upon which we must build. I'm particularly grateful to the Honourable Lady from Motherwell and Wishaw for mentioning DFN Project Search. DFN stands for David Forbes Nixon. He's a very incredible man whose own son is autistic and who has built with the charity that he's set up this incredible network, and she's right to mention that. Can I just commend my honourable friend for her remarks? She knows that I'll be holding her and the government's feet to the fire on this. Let's now use this as the basis of progress. Let's get industry and business behind this. Let's move the dial on autism employment. And let's get on with it. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes